Thank you for that testimony. As you testified, you do not provide assistance when human rights violations occur. However, there is a provision whereby, in an extraordinary circumstance, we could. And here's the argument that I would make about Boko Haram and why this is an extraordinary circumstance. You have a situation here where we're focused on the kidnapping of 300 girls some weeks ago. But in the meantime, more have been kidnapped. As we talk about it, an additional group of schoolgirls were kidnapped. As we talk about it, additional attacks have occurred. 118 killed this morning, 300 killed a few weeks ago. As we talk about it, 500 schools have been destroyed, and Boko Haram, their modus operandi is to destroy the schools and then recruit young, uneducated men into their ranks and teach them jihad. And so as the jihad mushrooms out across North Africa and into Cameroon and into Chad and into neighboring states, we say, well, human rights violations have occurred in Nigeria, so we're limited in what we can do. The difficulty is that Boko Haram is in a process of expanding their terror, and the frequency of these attacks, the attacks on girls, that's been an evolution. I mean, as they've intimidated and frightened the Nigerian military, they're now to the point where a lot of military units have run away. And so they can go in and take girls, and then, they can turn them into concubines or sell them or enslave them, because that's what they're actually doing. They're enslaving. And I would say that is an extraordinary circumstance that might necessitate the U.S. We have U.S. forces well positioned to advise and assist Nigerian forces in the search for these girls. And in this role, U.S. forces are trained to deal with hostage situations. Unfortunately, the Nigerian forces are not. They are trained to deal and track in jungle environments. They can advise and assist right up to the point of an attack. They don't have to be involved in the attack. But they could use those unique assets that the U.S. has in terms of our spy satellite capabilities and et cetera, in order to track and rescue these girls. This would be very similar to the mission that we have approved with respect to the Lord's Resistance Army. And for a number of years, if you think about it, how many years did it take us to galvanize some support against Joseph Kony? I think it was about 15 years of Joseph Kony marauding and kidnapping young boys and making child soldiers out of 12-year-old boys, and young girls and making them concubines. I think 15,000 was roughly the number of people he slaughtered before we finally put him on defense by authorizing U.S. forces to help track him. So now he's the one that's being tracked instead of the one tracking others, right? It used to be he would maraud, he would take his band into Congo or northern Uganda or southern Sudan or Central African Republic and just create mayhem. But now at least he's on the run. Somebody said this morning, well, we haven't got him yet. No, we haven't caught him yet, but he is on the run. And there's little doubt that they're going to run him down. And it is a completely different situation than it was a couple of years ago when he was on the offensive. Now, you've got the same situation here. And frankly, we should do the same thing. For the sake of humanity, we should do the same thing. We should not allow this cancer to spread the way it is. We heard from Deborah this morning, Deborah Peter, about the uncompromising position where they tell her father, that he has to quit. He was a pastor. They burned the church, they killed him, they killed her young brother, and now they've kidnapped her schoolmates. I think the time is at hand for the United States to help build the morale. Think about what this would mean to the Nigerian forces if we were willing to give them this assistance. You could ensure that the strategy for the rescue operation launched by them is very well planned. You could boost the morale and effectiveness of the Nigerian forces. And you could ensure that our intelligence, reconnaissance, surveillance assets are put to best use. So I would just ask for your response, if you could, to the observation. Is there any reason why we can't offer that waiver and treat this the same way we've treated going after Joseph Kony?
I think the waiver issue, I would defer to my State Department colleague in terms of the specific provisions of Leahy, but what I could quickly do is agree in terms of some of the diagnostics as you look at the situation with the Lord's Resistance Army and why we're on a successful path collectively at this point and how that pertains to the Boko Haram situation. You've identified, Congressman, the elements of success. You have neighbors who are working together under a regional task force construct to address the LRA challenge. You have a Ugandan government dedicated to addressing the governance and economic concerns of northern Uganda, which helped give rise to the phenomenon of the Lord's Resistance Army in the first place. With external support, Uganda and the other forces have been able to develop an intelligence and information picture that's been very important, and then launched a very successful information campaign that reaches the populations in the affected areas that are then able to further assist in the tracking operations. So I think many of those elements are very relevant to how we could productively work with Nigeria and its neighbors going forward vis-a-vis Boko Haram.
And Dory, I would just add one other thing for your consideration, and maybe Dr. Sewell would like to comment on this as well. But the one difference is that with Boko Haram, we have a group that is a threat to U.S. interests as well, to quote the State Department testimony over on the Senate side. So, or perhaps it was the Defense Department. But there is no question that a jihadist group like this that directs its efforts and its bombing against those who believe in empowering women or teaching women is also a threat to the United States or our interests. So it would seem to me that if we're going to authorize this with respect to going after Joseph Kony, we certainly should do it here. Dr. Sewell.
Thank you for your observations, and I share your sense of urgency about the matter. I think with respect to the specific question concerning sanctions, it's my understanding that there is limited waiver authority in the case of national security emergencies, and that the decision rests at the highest levels of the government with regard to exercising a national security emergency exception.
Is it under consideration as an exemption?
I can't speak to what the senior members of this government are discussing with regard to Leahy. I think the focus right now is very much on the safe rescue of the girls. And so when I—
Well, yes, but the Leahy Amendment is what prohibits our active cooperation in the steps that I've just enumerated here, you know, in the tracking on the ground and to be able to plan that attack on the ground. That's the whole point. I mean, we had the testimony by the Defense Department last week in the Senate that this vetting is a persistent and very troubling limitation on our ability to provide assistance. They're talking about the Leahy provision here, particularly training assistance that the Nigerians so badly need, unquote. So this is the problem.
And so I'd like to address it. The issue is to disaggregate the immediate crisis and what options are available to deal with supporting the Nigerians in their effort to rescue the girls versus longer-term systemic and force-wide engagement. And I think it's very important to both disaggregate those and then to look at the facts as they pertain to each case. In the first case, I spoke yesterday to the deployment team in Abuja, and they are very pleased with the growing level of cooperation that exists, both within the Intel Fusion Center and with their broader discussions with their Nigerian counterparts. They are hopeful that U.S. assistance will be increasingly useful to the Nigerians in their effort, and they nonetheless rely on choices made by the government of Nigeria in terms of what they would like to avail themselves of and how to proceed. More broadly, the security assistance issue, and again, I would refer, I think Amanda Dory can speak in great detail about the level of security assistance that is occurring right now, but we have been able to, pursuant to the Leahy Law, create essentially 2 new battalions with whom we are working, one a specialized counterterrorism force and the other a Ranger battalion, to create their specialized military capabilities with regard to the kind of military challenges that Boko Haram presents.
Here would be my suggestion. Thank you. Here was my suggestion. Ask for a temporary waiver. If you don't want a permanent waiver, ask for a temporary waiver. Designate this as an extraordinary circumstance and get to an answer to the point that your colleague made from the Department of Defense, that it is a persistent and very troubling limitation on our ability to provide assistance, particularly training assistance, that the Nigerians so badly need. That is the statement from the Department of Defense. It needs to be addressed.